There is a specific kind of disappearance that has nothing to do with failure. No scandal, no breakdown, no cautionary tale at dinner parties. The person simply recedes, quietly, completely. And if you have scrolled through contacts landing on a name that once meant something real, a college roommate who dismantled any argument in 30 seconds, a colleague who saw project collapse 2 months before anyone else suspected anything, someone from your hometown, always tuned to a frequency no one else could hear. You know exactly the kind of disappearance I mean. You search their name, nothing recent, no professional updates, no social media footprint, no hot takes anywhere on the internet. They have simply gone quiet. The strange part is this: they did not fail. So where did they go? What follows is an answer. By the end, you will understand someone in your life in a way you never quite managed before. Or you will understand yourself. Start with the pattern, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Think about the arc of someone genuinely, unusually intelligent. Not merely well-read, but the kind of person whose mind builds systems, traces connections most people overlook, and asks questions, making rooms go quiet. In school, they were probably ahead. In their 20s, probably driven. Somewhere in their 30s or 40s, something fundamentally shifts within them. The ambition does not disappear. It turns inward. Energy that once went into climbing, networking, staying visible migrates somewhere else entirely. Into a book nobody else has heard of. Into a garden. Into a project that resists easy explanation to anyone who asks about it. This is not a modern phenomenon or product of our distracted age. It is one of the most consistent patterns in human achievement history. Isaac Newton produced his gravitation theory, not inside a prestigious institution, but during the Great Plague of London in the 1660s alone. 2 years at his family farm in Lincolnshire. 2 years of uninterrupted thinking. He later described it as his miraculous year of discovery. The world received calculus from that solitude. Henry David Thoreau walked away from conventional society in 1845 to begin something new. He spent 2 years at Walden Pond. He was 27 years old. People thought he had lost his mind completely during that time. What he produced shaped American philosophy for the next 2 centuries. The reclusive Thomas Pynchon published celebrated fiction while avoiding public life. No interviews, no appearances, just the work itself. J.D. Salinger wrote The Catcher in the Rye, then moved to rural New Hampshire alone. He refused to publish another word for decades. He kept writing. He simply stopped performing entirely for the watching world around him. The pattern is everywhere. It begs a serious question. Is this withdrawal a symptom of something going wrong, or something going right? Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spent decades studying not just the individual mind, but the shared mental architecture all human beings inherit, called instinct. He called it the collective unconscious. The human brain arrives preloaded with inherited patterns of thinking and feeling baked over thousands of years. Before you ever consciously chose to believe anything, a massive portion of your worldview was already installed inside you by invisible forces. Jung's observation was that most people spend their entire lives running that pre-installed software without ever questioning its origin or authority. They want what they are told to want. They fear what they are told to fear. They measure success by metrics handed down by others. Parents, culture, employer, social media feed, and they do all of this while genuinely believing they are making fully independent choices every day. Jung called this identification with the collective, so merged with the shared script that you mistake it entirely for your own authentic voice. Here is where it gets interesting. Highly intelligent people tend at some point to notice the script running beneath every social interaction they join. They begin seeing machinery behind the curtain. They realize much of what passes for opinion is just recycled assumption dressed in confident language. Much of what passes for ambition is just programmed anxiety. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. The lens change is permanent. Jung called the process individuation, the gradual, sometimes painful work of becoming who you actually are rather than who you were designed to be. But there is a catch. Jung was unusually honest about this. Society does not like individuation. Society needs predictability above almost everything. It needs people to follow the script. When someone begins to deviate, asking questions without approved answers, the collective pushes back immediately. Not always overtly. Often it is subtle. You are told you are too much. You are overthinking. You are not being realistic about anything. You are difficult to work with. You get passed over for promotions, going to people who are more comfortable, more agreeable, more legible to management. At some point, many genuinely intelligent people make a simple calculation. The cost of participation is higher than any possible reward offered, so they begin to exit. There is a phenomenon that rarely gets named but sits at the center of this hidden burden of high intelligence. Call it translation exhaustion. When you think in systems, your mind constructs models, traces consequences, holds complexity without prematurely resolving it. You are operating at a level most conversations simply do not reach. Every single interaction then requires translation down from your natural depth. Compress layered thought into a digestible sound bite. You strip away qualifications because people find them tedious and slow down conversation. You lose the nuance because nuance reads as evasiveness. You say it is complicated and watch eyes glaze over across the table from you. You say something simpler and feel a small internal betrayal. You do this dozens of times a day, in every meeting, dinner, casual exchange. What most people do not realize is that this translation work is not merely socially exhausting. It is cognitively corrosive to the mind. The mind is like a muscle. Use it below its capacity long enough, and it does not stay sharp. It simply drifts away. The habit of simplifying bleeds into private thinking. The constant performance of being easier than you are starts to hollow you out slowly. Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the mask we wear for society. For most people, the gap between mask and true self is manageable. The mask fits reasonably well. But for someone whose natural way of engaging is deeply out of step with what environments reward, it becomes suffocating. Consider what this looks like in a real workplace. You are in a meeting. Someone presents a strategy with 3 obvious fatal flaws visible immediately. You see them immediately, not out of arrogance, simply because that is how your mind actually works in any given situation or context. But the last time you raised concerns this early, you were quietly labeled negative, not a team player, someone who complicates everything unnecessarily. So you stay quiet. You watch the plan get approved. You watch it fail 6 months later, exactly the way you had predicted it would. A small part of you dims. This happens repeatedly. The gap between who you are and who you are permitted to be grows each time. Eventually, the performance becomes untenable. A 2021 Stanford Street UD found people with above average intelligence spend 6 to 8 hours performing normalcy daily, calibrating their expression, moderating their language, managing how they come across to others. That is almost a full extra unpaid daily work shift. They get exhausted by it, so they stop. They trade the external performance for something internal. They get quieter, harder to reach from outside. They are still very much alive, but they are investing that energy somewhere real, somewhere that asks something genuine of them instead of demanding less. There's another reason intelligent people withdraw that almost no one addresses directly. It is uncomfortable. Highly intelligent people make others feel exposed. Not deliberately, not cruelly, simply by existing at their natural level. When you meet someone physically stronger, the common reaction is often admiration. But when you meet someone who thinks more clearly, who asks questions you had not thought to ask, something different happens in the brain. Researchers studying social cognition found intellectual comparison activates threat responses in ways physical or financial comparison often does not in subjects. Your thinking is tightly bound to your sense of self. If someone challenges quality of your thinking, they are touching something close to your identity. So people defend against it, and the defense rarely looks like defense. It looks like dismissal, too theoretical, not practical, no emotional intelligence whatsoever. Sure, they are smart, but Jung called this shadow projection. When someone highlights your unexamined beliefs, the mind does not respond by thinking harder. Sometimes it concludes there is something wrong with them. The person being projected onto has done nothing. They simply showed up naturally. In doing so, they created an uncomfortable mirror for those around them. This is why Socrates was executed in 399 BCE in ancient Athens. Not because his ideas were dangerous like a weapon, but because his questions made people feel inadequate. That was intolerable to them collectively. This is why Alan Turing, who shortened World War II by years, was persecuted by the same government he had helped save from destruction. Brilliance, once it can no longer be used, becomes a threat to those in power. In everyday life, persecution is mundane, but no less real. You get talked over in meetings. Your ideas get credited to someone with a better personality who presents them more agreeably than you manage to. You are told to work on your communication style, which often translates to stop making us feel like we are not following you. You get passed over for leadership roles, going to people better at performing confidence than at actually possessing genuine competence in their position. The intelligent person looks around and makes a quiet assessment. This game is not designed for me to win honestly at any institutional level. Rather than compromise, they stop playing. Here is a hard truth about contemporary culture. Specifically, we say we value intelligence above other things. We celebrate genius in retrospect on postage stamps, in biopics, in mythology of the lone inventor. But in daily institutional experience, it is different. What gets rewarded is not depth, it is legibility, it is relatability. It is making complex things seem simple, a very different skill entirely. That is a very different skill from actually understanding complex things. Think about what thrives online: short, punchy, emotionally direct, absolute in claim. Nuance does not trend, caveats do not get shared. The moment you say it depends, you have already lost the algorithm entirely and completely. IT researchers tracked how information spreads and found oversimplified, emotionally charged content travels dramatically faster than accurate, nuanced information online. Platforms are not neutral. They actively select for a mode of thinking that is the opposite of careful, nuanced, or deeply considered analysis. The modern workplace has the same problem. Companies put innovation on their walls and hire consultants for design, thinking workshops while promoting conformity. What they actually promote is competence within the existing framework. The person who questions the framework itself is a threat to institutional stability, to hierarchy, to the sense that people in charge know what they are doing. Those people then leave or get pushed out entirely. 5 years later, the company spends a fortune trying to recreate what that person was doing naturally every single day without recognition. Mathematician Grigori Perelman solved one of the most notoriously difficult problems in mathematics, the Poincare conjecture, stumping best minds for a century. He was offered the Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics, and $1 million prize. He declined both awards entirely and completely without hesitation. He walked away from academia entirely. People said he had cracked. People said he was unstable. But consider an entirely different reading of this. Perhaps he understood exactly what accepting those prizes would mean, that he would become a performer, his identity handed back as a product. The system that had ignored him for years would now want to claim him as proof of its own legitimacy and significance to the world. He chose to remain himself at significant personal cost. That is not madness. That is a coherent set of values maintained under genuine external pressure. Jung himself built a tower, not metaphorically, but literally, in the Swiss village of Bollingen. Beginning in 1923, he constructed it with his own hands. He designed it himself, laid the stones himself, expanded it over the years, and spent long stretches there with no telephone, no electricity at all. Writing by candlelight, cooking over an open fire. His colleagues thought he was having a breakdown. His biographers debated for decades what it truly meant. Jung described Bollingen simply the only place where he could hear himself think, where no one needed him to be simpler or more accessible, where the work could be what it needed to be without negotiation. The concepts he developed in that solitude are fundamental to modern psychology today. Individuation, the shadow, the archetype. These are now fundamental to modern psychology, to literature, to therapy, to our understanding of human development entirely. Not despite the withdrawal, because of it. This is the central paradox at the heart of everything said here about intelligence, solitude, and disappearance. The withdrawal that looks like failure from outside is often, from inside, the beginning of the most important work a person will ever do. Think about the people we now celebrate without reservation. Emily Dickinson wrote nearly 1,800 poems in her bedroom in Amherst, Massachusetts, alone always. She barely left the house. She published almost nothing in her lifetime. Neighbors thought her odd. Today she is considered one of the greatest poets. Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, then spent her long life in Monroeville, Alabama, quietly deflecting interview requests and living simply. One book, immortal. Stanley Kubrick made some of the most influential films in cinema history while living as a recluse outside London, avoiding crowds, working at his own pace with obsessive attention to detail. He was widely regarded as difficult, eccentric, impossible. He was also incomparable. These people did not disappear because they failed to engage. They disengaged precisely so they could do the work that full engagement was preventing. So if you have read this far, let me ask directly. Are you feeling any recognition right now? Not of someone else, of yourself. Maybe you have felt a slow pull away from conversations that once seemed to matter. A growing preference for your own company feels like relief. You start declining invitations without guilt. In certain rooms you go quieter, not because you lack things to say, but because explaining costs too much. You feel most alive deep inside a project, a book, a problem, a piece of music. Least alive in rooms full of small talk. If any of that resonates, consider what Jung's framework actually suggests. This might not be pathology. It might be direction towards something genuinely important. Pull towards solitude, when it comes from intellectual vitality rather than despair, is often the psyche communicating that you need more room. You are operating at a fraction of your actual depth, and your inner life is demanding something more genuinely worthy of your full capacity. That does not mean cutting everyone off or burning your life down. Jung did not advocate for permanent isolation. He had family, practice, community. What he advocated for was conscious withdrawal, intentional space, deliberate protection of inner life from the relentless noise of collective demand placed on you. The question is not whether to withdraw. The question is whether you are doing it on purpose or simply drifting without intention. In every era, people whose ideas end up shaping the world are almost never the most visible people during their own lifetimes. They are people willing to be invisible long enough to do real work. Newton at that farm in Lincolnshire. Thoreau at Walden Pond. Jung at his stone tower in Bollingen. The world did not lose them when they went quiet. The world found them years later. Sometimes centuries later, when the work they had done in solitude finally reached people who were genuinely ready to receive it. So if you feel the pull toward a quieter, deeper life with more room in it, try this reframe. You are not disappearing at all. You are finally beginning to show up for the work that actually matters. On the timeline it requires, in the space depth, genuinely needs. Build the tower, do the work. The world has a way of catching up to those patient enough to work in genuine silence.